And I didn't cancel a $2.4 billion contract in anger. I activated a clause. There's a difference. The wine wasn't spilled. It was delivered. The Hallberg Infrastructure Gala was about 30 minutes in when Evelyn Hallberg stepped directly in front of me. The ballroom was glass and gold, 300 donors, analysts, regional officials, and board members orbiting a single family name. She looked at my jacket first, then my guest badge, then my face. VIP seating is reserved, she said. I know, I replied. Catering access is through the side corridor. I'm not catering. She gave me a thin, polite smile. Then you're lost. I'm exactly where I need to be. She saw a woman standing where she believed only power belonged. A small pause, not confusion, decision. She reached for a passing tray, lifted a glass of red wine, and tilted it slowly over my chest. The pour was deliberate, not rage, not an accident. Classification. A few guests gasped. Someone laughed too quickly. One director looked down at his phone as if that absolved him. Across the room, the incoming chief executive officer, Daniel Raines, noticed and did nothing. I didn't move. I didn't wipe the stain. I let the room record it. She didn't insult me, I thought as the wine soaked through the silk of my blouse. She sorted me. Grant Hallberg appeared seconds later, smiling until he saw my jacket. What happened here? He asked. I met his eyes. Hospitality, I said evenly. And I wondered if this is how they treat a stranger in public. How do they price risk in private cross-meridian? Capital had not wired $1 yet. That part mattered. The commitment on paper was $2.4 billion structured, staged, performance-based, 6 years, infrastructure modernization, public praise already drafted, but signatures don't move money. Authorization does. And final authorization requires me in the room. I don't deploy early. I don't deploy remotely, and I don't deploy on reputation alone. Section 14.2 sits halfway through the agreement. Reputational conduct during negotiation, material impact, immediate withdrawal rights. It doesn't sound dramatic when read aloud. It isn't meant to. 2 years ago, I ignored a smaller signal. A chairman mocking a line employee during a town hall, dismissed it as personality, closed the deal anyway. It cost us 9 months of damage control, 3 institutional partners, and a quiet erosion of trust that no return metric fully repaired. Arrogance compounds faster than interest. That lesson stayed. By the time I left the gala, the wine had dried into a darker shade against silk. The footage I knew had already been archived. Later that night, my phone lit up. Daniel Raines. Sorry about earlier. That wasn't ideal. I watched the typing indicator disappear twice before he sent it. I replied with 2 words, but it was information because that's what it was. Not humiliation, not emotion, data. I don't deploy capital into culture I haven't measured. The question wasn't whether I had been insulted. The question was whether I had just measured something expensive. The next morning, the cameras were already live when I walked into the boardroom. Red indicator lights, 3 angles, internal stream, investor archive, legal record, transparency, they called it. Grant Hallberg stood at the head of the table, posture steady, tone rehearsed. Today marks a historic transition, he began. Hallberg Infrastructure enters its next phase of disciplined growth. Disciplined. I took my seat without interrupting the first slide. Leadership transition language, market confidence, strategic alignment. Then I spoke. We need to address last night. The room shifted, but only slightly. Grant didn't look at me immediately. A social misunderstanding, he said, adjusting his cuff. Nothing more. Paul, the chief financial officer, lowered his eyes to the binder in front of him. He didn't turn a page. He didn't have to. Daniel Raines leaned forward. Is this material to funding? He asked carefully. Grant answered before I did. No, I didn't correct him. Not yet. A director 2 seats down flipped open the agreement binder. Pages rustled. He cleared his throat. Section 14.2. Reputational conduct during negotiation or closing that materially impacts standing may trigger capital withdrawal. The room tightened by half a degree. Grant gave a small laugh. Boilerplate. Paul spoke quietly. It was revised at their request. Silence. Several heads turned toward me. I didn't move, didn't clarify, didn't confirm. Grant leaned back in his chair. Confidence settling in as if repetition could make it true. We're not jeopardizing a $2.4 billion partnership over optics. Optics. I watched him continue, watched him minimize, watched him double down on camera. I had not yet stated my authority. I had not yet corrected his assumption. Sometimes you don't interrupt a man while he is digging. You measure the depth. The question was no longer whether a line had been crossed. The question was whether he would stop digging or ask how deep the hole was. The air in the room had shifted, but no one had named it yet. Daniel was the one who finally did. Marcus, what exactly is your role in final authorization? He asked it carefully. Not confrontational, not differential, just precise. Grant answered for me to she's here representing the capital partner. Representing. I let the words sit between us for a moment. Then I corrected him. I don't represent the capital partner. Silence. I am the managing partner authorized to release the entire commitment. The recalculation was visible, not dramatic, just mathematical. Paul closed the binder in front of him. She is the sole signatory on the primary trench, he confirmed quietly. No one looked at Evelyn. She wasn't in the room, but everyone understood what had happened the night before. Grant adjusted his posture. Then let's move forward constructively, he said, tone smoothing into something closer to negotiation. Constructive requires acknowledgement, I replied. He held my gaze. For what exactly? He asked. I didn't raise my voice that you didn't embarrass a guest. I said, you tested a covenant. That landed harder than I intended, or maybe exactly as intended. Daniel exhaled slowly. Grant leaned back again, reclaiming composure. We are not turning a minor social incident into structural instability, he said. Minor. The cameras were still recording. So was I. No activation yet. No phone call. Just a room full of people understanding at different speeds that the person they had categorized the night before controlled whether 2.4 billion ever moved. The tension had peaked, but nothing had happened. Not yet. The question now wasn't about authority. It was about acknowledgement. Was it coming or was this about to escalate? Grant folded his hands on the table as if that settled it. We are not destabilizing a $2.4 billion partnership over something trivial. Trivial. Daniel shifted in his seat. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He looked at me, then at Grant. It may not be trivial, he said carefully. Perception. Grant cut him off. It was a social error, he said. Nothing. I watched Daniel retreat into silence. That told me more than his words would have. Intent isn't the claw's trigger. I said impact is. Grant shook his head once. You're overpricing a social error. No, I replied evenly. I'm pricing a governance risk. Cross the table. Paul's phone lit up briefly. He glanced down pre-market indicators already reacting to early chatter. Markets are sensitive to uncertainty. More sensitive to culture than most executives admit. Grant didn't notice or chose not to. I placed my phone face up on the table, not as a threat, as clarity. No one spoke. The cameras were still live. I gave them one final opening. Tell me why I should believe this won't happen again. I said when the cameras are off. Silence settled in layers. Grant leaned back. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No acknowledgement, no correction, no accountability. I turned to Daniel. He held my gaze for half a second, then looked down at the table. That was the moment. Not the whine, not the claws, the silence. I reached for my phone. If no one in the room was willing to draw the line, would I? No one answered my question. Grant adjusted his tie. We are not issuing a public apology over this. He said, there's nothing to apologize for. Minimize, reframe, control the narrative. That footage can be contextualized. He continued, we can clarify intent. Intent. He was still arguing motive. The clause never mentioned motive. I waited 1 second, 2, 3, just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then I picked up my phone. Activate section 14.2. I said, not raised, not sharp, precise. Across the table, Paul's posture changed before anyone else reacted. He knew what that sentence meant operationally. Grant gave a short laugh. You're posturing. I didn't look at him. I don't posture, I said. I document. On the other end of the line, my general counsel confirmed receipt. Formal notice drafted. Immediate suspension of capital commitment pending review. Effective immediately, I added. I ended the call. No dramatics, no slammed a phone, just quiet. For a moment, nothing happened. The room inhaled and held it. Grant leaned back, folding his arms. You're not going to tank a $2.4 billion structure over optics, while he said. Paul's phone buzzed. He didn't need to check it. He already knew. The primary trench had been suspended. Grant still believed this could be contained. Still believed authority lived at the head of the table and the cameras were still recording. The capital was no longer committed. Say the question now was simple. How long does it take for $2.4 billion to disappear? 2 minutes. That was all it took. Paul's phone vibrated first. A short, a contained sound against polished wood. He glanced down. Primary trench suspended. Grant didn't miss the movement. That's procedural, he said quickly. Temporary. Paul didn't respond. A second vibration. This one longer. He looked again. Withdrawal notice executed. The words seemed to drain the color from his face before they reached the rest of us. Around the table, other phones began to light up. One, then three, then nearly all of them. Assistants texting, legal calling, investor relations asking for clarification that did not exist. On the wall-mounted screen behind Grant, a small ticker began to refresh. Pre-market indicators shifting -7%. A pause -10. No one spoke for several seconds. Daniel leaned toward me, voice low. Is there still a path to reverse? I kept my eyes on the screen. Clause don't include regret. Grant stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. The lead independent director didn't move. No, he said. Governance discussion required. Grant stared at him. You can't be serious. The director folded his hands. We are past optics. The cameras were still live, red lights blinking. What had begun as transparency now looked like exposure. Grant's authority had not vanished, but it had fractured. Phones continued to vibrate. The quiet kind of panic, the expensive kind, settled into the room. No shouting, no theatrics, just consequence. The capital was gone. The market was reacting. The board had a decision to make. Would they protect the chairman or the company? Grant regained his voice before he regained control. This is investor activism overreach, he said. A disproportionate response designed to intimidate leadership. No one nodded. Paul spoke without lifting his eyes. Klaus's conditions were met. Grant turned toward him. You're agreeing with this. I'm stating fact. A director opened the agreement binder again. This time slowly, deliberately. Section 14.2. He read aloud. Documented conduct during negotiation or closing that materially impacts reputational standing may trigger immediate withdrawal. He paused. No intent requirement, he added. Impact sufficient. The room felt smaller. Daniel straightened in his chair. This is bigger than optics, he said. Voice steady but tight. We were warned. Grant snapped before he could stop himself. Stay in your lane, Daniel. That did it. The shift was subtle but irreversible. One director looked at another. A quiet exchange without words. The lead independent director cleared his throat. We need executive session. Grant's jaw tightened. I am the chair. The response came evenly. Not if we vote otherwise. Silence. No one moved. The cameras were still running. Grant scanned the table, searching for loyalty. What he found instead was calculation. The market was down double digits. The capital had been withdrawn. And the footage from the night before was now contextualized in real time. This was no longer about social error. It was about leadership risk. Grant had lost narrative control. The question now was sharper. Would the board sacrifice stability or sacrifice him? The lead independent director requested extraordinary session. The cameras remained on. No one reached to turn them off. Motion was introduced without drama. Administrative leave for the board chair pending governance review. Grant laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. You're reacting to market noise. He said, this is panic. No one answered. A director to his left hesitated before raising his hand. Another kept his hand down. Abstention. That detail mattered. This was not a unanimous moral stand, but it was calculation. Votes were counted. The motion carried by a narrow margin. Grant's authority didn't collapse. It narrowed then snapped. Daniel's pending appointment was placed on hold pending review. Markets were now down 14% and the number appeared on 3 separate screens almost simultaneously. Grant looked at me across the table. You've destabilized us. I met his eyes. You destabilized yourself. No one flinched. No one objected. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, no security escort, just language procedure removal. The cameras captured the transfer of authority in real time. Grant remained seated for a moment longer as if refusing to stand would preserve something intangible. It didn't. A company does not implode when leverage evaporates. It compresses. It recalculates. It exposes the fault lines that were already there. The chair was vacant. The capital was gone. The board was fractured. The question was no longer about culture. It was structural. What does a company look like when leverage evaporates? The market opened at 9:30. By 9:42, the decline was no longer speculative. By closing, the stock was down 17%, not collapse. Compression. Analysts moved quickly. Governance instability. Leadership credibility risk. Investor withdrawal linked to cultural miscalculation. Credit agencies flagged review status within hours. Institutional investors paused secondary commitments. Banking partners requested updated exposure models. The capital vacuum wasn't loud. It was measurable. I didn't celebrate. There is nothing satisfying about structural correction. Only necessary. By late afternoon, my phone lit up again. Daniel, I should have said something. I read it twice before responding. You had the microphone. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. Silence is rarely neutral. In boardrooms, it aligns with power. In markets, it prices risk. In culture, it signals tolerance. The cameras had been on. The claws had been clear. The numbers had moved. What had not moved was accountability until it was forced. The company would survive. Most do. But leverage had shifted. Authority had been recalibrated, and the cost was visible on every screen in the country. The question lingered longer than the decline itself. Is silence cheaper or more expensive? He asked to meet 3 weeks later. No cameras, no board, no microphones blinking red in the corner, just a conference room overlooking a river that moved more steadily than his stock had. Grant arrived alone. No counsel, no assistant. He didn't sit at the head of the table. That detail didn't escape me. You could have warned me, he said. I did, I replied. When she lifted the glass, he exhaled through his nose. That was a social error. It was a governance event. He looked at me as if I had translated something he preferred to leave abstract. You really believe a moment like that justifies structural damage? I believe moments like that reveal structural risk. He didn't argue immediately. He adjusted his cuff instead. A habit control through movement. Will the capital return? He asked finally. Not under your chairmanship. The words weren't sharp. They were final. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the window for several seconds. This wasn't about apology. It wasn't about public relations. It was about structure. He understood that now. The board had placed him on administrative leave pending review. He was still technically chair but not functionally. You've made your point, he said quietly. No, I answered. The market did. He didn't look defeated, just recalibrated. Arrogance doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It restructures itself or it gets removed. The room was quiet when we stood. No handshake, no hostility, just consequence. What costs more, arrogance or removal? It was never about wine. Wine evaporates. Stains fade. Footage archives. What remains is classification. Who belongs? Who doesn't? Who is assumed powerful? Who is assumed decorative? That night she saw a woman standing where she believed only power belonged. She acted accordingly. The board acted accordingly. The market acted accordingly. Sorting is rarely loud. It is quiet, reflexive, cultural. It happens in glances, in pauses, in laughter that arrives too quickly, and in silence. Silence is the most expensive form of agreement. The clause did not punish insult. It enforced structure. Capital is not emotional. It does not bruise. It reallocates. She thought she sorted me. She sorted her board. She sorted her leverage. The moment the glass tilted, the outcome was already in motion. Not because I was offended, because I was observing. If you humiliate someone you assume is powerless, you eventually humiliate your shareholders. Capital does not tolerate that. Markets do not debate dignity. They price it. Governance is not about avoiding embarrassment. It is about preventing predictable risk. What happened in that ballroom was predictable. What happened in the boardroom was procedural. What happened in the market was mathematical. There was no revenge, no spectacle, only consequence. She thought it was a glass of wine. It was priced at $2.4 billion. Ya YouTube ki sakrept ha is k images per imdu.